Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar, ELDs, Maximizing the Good, Minimizing the Bad, Avoiding the Ugly. I'm Luke Kibbe and I'll be your moderator. Before we get started, I wanted to cover a couple of housekeeping items. This webinar is interactive, so please use the chat box to submit your questions at any time during and after the presentation. We will be monitoring them and we'll have a live Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We will also have your phones muted as there's a lot of static with a lot of people on the line. So again, please use the chat box. Also, you will be receiving the slides and recording of the webinar after it is over, so keep an eye on that in your email. With that, let's get started. I'm very excited to introduce Dave Gray, President of Glowstone Trucking Solutions. Welcome, Dave. Take it away.
Thank you, Luke, and good afternoon, everyone. So ELDs, big topic in today's transportation world. When looking at kind of a title for this presentation, the good, the bad, and the ugly seem to fit pretty darn well. So we've kind of taken a little bit off of the Clint Eastwood movie, one of my favorite old westerns, The Good, Bad, and the Ugly. So the topic certainly seems to fit. So let's get started. First, before we get into the good, let's take a quick review of an ELD. So ELD, Electronic Logging Device, and the ELD, that name was coined by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the FMCSA. And it refers to the device that will meet the requirements of their new logging, hours of service logging rule that begins in December of this year. So that device, they published probably, I think it's over 150 pages of requirements that this device has to meet in order to be an ELD within their rules. So what the ELD device does that other automatic onboard recording devices that are currently allowable within the rules, what it does that the AOBDRs don't is synchronizes with the vehicle engine to accurately record driving time. And again, you know there's other duty statuses. There's sleeper berth, there's on duty not driving, there's off duty. And with the new rule, there's going to be a fifth duty status in the privacy, personal conveyance is the fifth driving. So driving time, it only measures driving time. It synchronizes to the engine. It'll monitor. It'll know when the truck is driving. It won't know when the driver is off duty or on duty or in the sleeper berth or in personal conveyance. It only will know driving time. And the FMCSA feels that if they can control driving time, get everybody to follow the driving time rules, that the roads will be safer out there. So that's what this ELD is meant to do, and what all of the controversy is over, is accurately measuring and recording driving time. So it only applies to commercial motor vehicles greater than 10,001 pounds. So that is what is under the FMCSA's purview. It's only those vehicles. So 10,001 pounds, obviously that can be a one-ton pickup truck and heavier. So a lot of folks don't realize that these ELDs can relate to them or be a mandate for them if they're not exempted. So vehicles that small and greater are, the ELD does apply to them. So and basically it's to all drivers that are required to fill out paper logs today will have to have an ELD at some point in time. If you're currently using an AOBDR that's in the current regulations, you'll be able to continue to use that until 2019, but in 2019 you'll then need to switch over to an ELD. So they are grandfathering the current electronic logging devices until 2019, But if you're using paper logs, you're going to need to switch to an ELD. So there are exemptions, but, and I guess I use the word but here, is, you really need to consider whether you want to do the exemption or not. It may seem like a no-brainer, but hopefully by the time I get through with the good part of ELDs, you may want to reconsider. But the exemptions, there are exemptions out there. So if you're currently operating trucks under 26,000 pounds and within 150 air mile radius of those medium and light duty trucks, and if you are starting out and returning to the same location each day, and that day does not last any longer than 12 hours, and within that 12-hour day, you are only driving 11 hours, you would qualify for the exemption and would not have to have an ELD. If you're driving heavier trucks, 26,000 and heavier trucks, the air mile radius is 100 miles, but the same rules apply. If you want to claim that exemption, you need to be leaving and returning to the same point. You would need to make sure that the driver's day is no longer than 12 hours and that within that 12-hour day does not drive any more than 11 hours. So if you meet that criteria, you would be exempt from having to have the ELD. Another exemption is maybe you only go outside of the 100 air mile radius less than 8 times in a month. If you do that, and you do not have to have an ELD, you would use paper logs in those cases where you did go outside of the 100 air miles, but you can only do it 8 times in a month. If you're going to do it 9 times, you have to have an ELD. So they're very, very strict on that. There's other exemptions. Drive-away, tow-away type vehicles don't have to have ELDs. There's older equipment, which is I think 2000, the year 2000 model and older won't have to have an ELD, mostly because of the technology in the older vehicles isn't as easily compatible with the requirements within the ELD. So there are exemptions. Whether you use those exemptions, obviously it's something that you've got to make a decision on. So currently in the ELD process, we are in phase 1, and it's the awareness and transition phase. And that is obviously letting everyone know about ELDs and what they must do and who they must buy them from and when they must have the transition done. So December 2017 is when the new ELD rule takes effect. And again, if you are currently using an electronic logging device that qualifies under the current rule, the AOBRD rule, then you are grandfathered until 2019. But again, if you're using paper logs, implementation begins December 2017. There's a lot of folks out there hearing a lot of comments back from our clients about, well, this rule is going to get taken away by the Trump administration. And the Trump administration is going to have effect on some of the FMCSA rules that are kind of in the proposal stage and for example, the greenhouse gas emissions. I think the Trump administration will affect that. There's talk about the safety fitness determination rule that might go away with the new administration or at least be postponed. Sleep apnea, some of those rules definitely could be on the chopping block, but as far as the ELD, it was mandated by Congress, so you'd have to overturn Congress to get this thing changed. And quite frankly, within the trucking industry, there's half the industry that want it and half the industry that doesn't want it. So even within the industry, there is some conflict as to their value and the use. And because there isn't a unified front, it's probably, in my estimation, and who knows what's going to happen for real, but it's probably 90% sure that this ELD thing will go through. So in the last thing to talk about in our quick review is the device that is purchased or leased must be FMCSA certified. So the FMCSA, I mentioned, has 150 pages of requirements that this ELD must do. And the makers of these devices have a very strict list of testing and how they have to meet all of the requirements or tell the FMCSA that they have met all their requirements and basically self-certify themselves. So we'll talk about this self-certification list and the list of these folks here in a little bit. And we did take a screenshot yesterday of the first page of the certified list. So this, if you go to the FMCSA website and you drill down into the certified list of folks that have self-certified their equipment as an ELD, this is the first page. There are two other pages. I think the thing to notice here that if you look at the software version, most everybody's like a 1.0, 1.3, there's a 2.0, 1.1. So a lot of this stuff is brand new. A lot of the folks that are on this list, even on pages 2 and 3, you've probably not heard of. They're all out there trying to gain some market share with the trucking industry having to make this huge conversion on millions of trucks. There's a lot of money to be made. And I would expect probably a year from now that the list of makers that are appearing on this list, there's going to be a big market consolidation because there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. And we can talk more about the buyer beware part of this process here in a little bit, but this is what that certified list will look like. All right, keeping with our movie reference, let's move on to the good about an ELD. And really what it comes down to is, ready or not, welcome to the future. ELDs, there's been enough conversion with electronic logging to this point where there's lots of case studies out there. And the case studies, when you read them, the drivers like it. Even the ones that said, I'll never go to an electronic log, I don't like it, I'll quit, I'll never do it. Those drivers who have done it like it. It saves them a whole bunch of time. Filling out those paper logs is a pain in the neck. So it saves them a great deal of time. And the comments from the case studies are, the drivers say, once they get through the learning curve and understand what it's doing, that they like it. And of course, on the back end, you're dealing with data. If you still need to audit logs, there's going to be some requirements to help the drivers edit logs because, again, the ELD is only going to automatically record driving. And so if the driver is driving and ends the day, and for the ELD will automatically change him to on duty, but it'll leave him to on duty unless the driver interacts with the ELD and tells it that he is now off duty. So if he forgets to interact with it, he'll wake up in the morning and see that his ELD is telling him that he's out of hours. So that needs to be corrected. It was a mistake. He got his 10 hours, so it needs to be edited. So on the back end, you're going to be, instead of dealing with all those pieces of paper, you're going to be dealing with electronic data from the back end and an editing process that you'll need to help the driver make the edit, send it back out to the driver for him to approve. So the ELDs really do save time, but the real true advantage of an ELD, the real good that can come out of it is when I started to think about it, it's almost like the quote from Neil Armstrong when he stepped on the moon. It's a small step for man, but a giant leap for mankind. The ELDs is kind of the first step for the trucking industry to get into the area of big data. And if you've read anything about technology and where it's going, you've probably read the term big data. Big data is out there. It is the future of, it's touching our lives today, and it's going to touch our lives in a bigger way in just about everything that we do and see and how we experience the world. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples. I'm sure you've heard of Amazon and the Amazon Prime and the ordering and how it's all done online. They are currently using big data. They get enough hits and enough people, enough data coming through their system they're starting to do predictive shipping. They can see trends in where products are needed and start to move that product or have new product made and shipped to that location before the first order is ever being made. So big data is being used today. It's going to be used even bigger. Another example is those of you that have a smartphone and use the traffic app to know whether there's traffic on the freeways for you to get to or go home from work. That traffic data, where it comes from, is Google has so many phones out there, and it knows the locations of those phones. It has developed algorithms to measure the distance and how long it takes that dot of where you're at on that phone to move, and it creates those maps, those traffic maps. So it's just a lot of folks with phones transmitting data that they have access to, and they're using that big data for traffic apps. So where's that going for trucking? Well, ELDs, the logging portion, is really, again, just a small step. There are huge advantages that trucking companies will take advantage of with all of the other data that an ELD, depending on the model that you get, can produce. So if you can imagine sitting, at your dashboard, and every sensor, every light, every gauge, all of that is monitored through the engine control module, the ECM. And if you can see that data in the truck in the cab of the truck or your car, all of that data is available through a telematics system that is really the platform of an ELD that can be used. And you talk about predictive shipping that Amazon uses. I mean, there's already folks in Europe in leased fleets of automobiles using the analytics, the data that's coming from those many telematics units in those cars to predict repairs. It's predictive maintenance. They're getting so much data that, and they may have a particular model of starter that is in a huge amount of their fleets, and they can tell by the data coming through the ECM that when a starter starts drawing so many amps to start the car, it's 80% through its life. And they automatically order a new starter, have it shipped to the right location where they've got already negotiated maintenance repair costs, and have that starter replaced before it ever breaks down. So, predictive maintenance, predictive, carriers will be able to measure the time at each of their shippers. If they've got a contract with somebody, well, why does it take my trucks, 2 hours to load at this particular shipper when all of the other shippers I use is 1 hour? I mean, you'll be able to measure all of that data. That data is going to be used in the future to every part of trucking, rates, and again, predictive maintenance, all of those types of things. So I was lucky enough to be able to attend a conference in January in Las Vegas, put on by the folks at Geotab, and they are one of the bigger players, I think, in telematics. They've got 700,000 units out there worldwide, so they've got all kinds of test cases and studies that they've been able to do based on all of the big data that they've gotten back. And they've looked at light duty fleets, they've looked at medium duty fleets and heavy duty fleets, and they've been able to calculate based on these companies using the data that comes back through these telematics units. And depending on the operation, these fleets using that data, fleet-wide cost savings of 10 to 16%. And 10 to 16% savings is huge within the industry. So where do those savings come from? It's improved safety. The telematics can tell, hard braking, speeding. It can tell, the driver behavior. It can tell how much fuel and idling is being used. It obviously can help with the maintenance and eventually predictive maintenance, productivity, how long is spent at a particular site and when the driver leaves it, when he enters it, and just how long, it is to maybe load the truck. All kinds of productivity can be measured based on all of this big data coming from the truck. So the ELD part of it, the electronic logging device, is just one small part of what could be a lot bigger and will be a lot bigger, and many, many companies are going to. So further into this study, and I would invite you to, if you ever wanted to read this study, I was pretty impressed with it from Geotab. I think if you go to their website and you look for their case studies, you'll find this particular case study. And I just picked out the heavy-duty vehicle part of the study, a truck that, and they classify that as a truck traveling 80,000 miles annually, so kind of long haul, is $1,470 a month savings by using the analytics, by managing that data that's coming there. So the good is that it can save a company money. And I guess I'll just mention, everybody's looking for a return on investment, but there's also, and I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with the COI. There's ROI, return on investment, but what about the COI? And COI is cost of ignoring. So that $1,470 that a company can save by using the telematics, those that choose to ignore, that's the money you're leaving on the table. So that's the cost of ignoring. So where your competitors or others in the industry may be saving that money and making them more competitive, that cost of ignoring will eventually affect you. So maximizing the good. Really, it's going to come down to a commitment to technology. I mean, the technology is being forced upon you, yes, but it's coming whether the mandate takes effect or not. This technology is being used, and it is producing big, significant results. So the commitment to technology is just, if you've dealt with systems and programming, you know that systems and programming is never done. It's not a one and done process. You can't just, I'm going to throw the ELD into the truck and now I'm done with it. It takes a commitment to manage that tool, and it's effective management. There's going to be all this new data that's coming out of it, and it must be maximized. You must manage it to maximize it in order to get the good out of it. So maximizing the good, you got to commit and you've got to manage. All right, continuing on with our little movie reference here, the bad. And there's definitely bad. The bad part is ELDs change everything. You've got to effectively manage, and what you have to manage is going to be different than what you're managing today. It's going to change how you operate and may even change the business culture. If you've got ownership that hates technology, that culture is going to have to change just because the market is going to mandate it. And the internal controls, how you react to things, have to be adjusted. You've got this new data coming in, and if I want to maximize it, I've got to, if I get this data saying this driver is speeding, I need to react to it. And you'll know that within 5 minutes of the driver speeding, because you can set it up to get an email the minute that they speed. You can set it up to get an email the minute they enter into a certain geographical location because you've put a geofence around it. All of that data is going to become available, and needing to figure out how to best use it to make yourself more profitable. So the bad is that it does change everything in how you operate. The learning curve takes time. Obviously, change takes time, and it must be repeated often, especially at the driver level where there's a lot of turnover. I mean, your ELD system is going to operate differently than somebody else's ELD system. So as your drivers turn over, there's going to be a need to be a continuous training and learning from the drivers. And it's not just the drivers. If you're just a small operation, maybe you've got 3 or 4 trucks, you've got a dispatcher. Well, if that dispatcher is not using that ELD data and is dispatching trucks on an 8-hour trip, and the driver's only got 2 hours left, that's going to be a violation and in big trouble for the company. So The training involves everyone, from the dispatchers to the ownership to the drivers. It's not just something that's going to be simple to do, and it's hard. Skills, different management and particularly staff skills may be required. Maybe you currently use a retired driver to audit your paper logs. He's been at it for 40 years, can go through a set of logs in a minute per driver to audit 30 days worth and be pretty darn accurate about it. Well, that's gonna, that skill set is great for now, but when ELDs comes, it's going to be electronic data. And does that driver have the skill set, or that log audit manager have that skill set to be able to take that data and maneuver it into reports, and then management have the skill to start counseling or to make use of that data so that it improves your operation. All of that is hard, different skills that may need to be learned. Maybe your company has it, maybe not. The bigger the organization, the harder the transition. The more people you've gotten involved have to get involved in this transition. So you owner-operators out there, your sphere of having to get folks on board is much, much smaller than the companies with multiple drivers, because you've got, again, everybody has to be on board to make these ELDs and the data, and to make the data useful and helping you and not hurting you. All right, so let's get to maybe some of the buyer beware. And again, not all telematics systems are the same. ELDs, again, there are products out there that are programmed to meet the 125 pages of FMCSA requirements, but that's what they're programmed to do. And yes, it does give you a summary of distance by state, and they may say, yes, certainly, IFTA requires a summary of miles by state. But if you go into the IFTA regulations, you need to keep that data for 4 years. You need to have breadcrumb trails, meaning you need the latitude and longitudes of every single trip, of every single truck. And that ELD, that's not a requirement within the ELD, and if they may not do that. And if you use that data for IFTA and they don't save it for you, or you don't save it and you don't have it, you are in big trouble for IFTA. Data retention, again, most of these telematics companies aren't going to save your data for 4 years. So for ELDs, the data only needs to be kept for 6 months because it's logs, and we all know log data only needs to be kept 6 months. That's not being changed. But again, if you want to use your system for something else other than ELDs, you've got to do your homework and make sure it's going to be right for you. Systems are open systems, meaning that some of them out there are developed to be and made to be easy to integrate with. I mean, different companies have different platforms that they use this for routing, they use that for dispatching or whatever, all the different systems that they use internally in their internal operations. These open systems are made to relatively easy share that data back and forth between. And they open up their APIs to other systems and third parties to come in and link with their system. There's a lot of the systems out there are closed systems, meaning that, yeah, maybe you can integrate with them with your other programs that you want to, but it's going to take them, the makers of this ELD, to be able to open up their API and custom build that thing for you, which can cost a lot of money, take a lot of time. So open system, closed systems. Features vary within these ELDs. Again, you can get just the ELD part, and that's all they do, or you can get some with all the bells and whistles, and you need to evaluate what those bells and whistles are. You don't want something that measures, the temperature of your reefer when you're a flatbed operation. You don't need that feature, so don't buy something with that feature in it, because that's part of what you're paying for. So you've got to look at the features. We talked about data retention already. How long do they keep the data? How long do you need to keep the data for, depending on what you're going to use it for? Installation process, is it plug and play, or is it something a little more involved than just plug and play. Security is a big deal in technology today. Security is, all of the protections they build in to make sure that the system isn't hacked and can't be messed with. The security is every time you turn around, somebody's being hacked, and the protocols that are put in place or that need to be put in place are huge and costly. So a startup company, how much money are they going to put towards the security versus a company that's been in the business for a while? So all things you need to take into consideration. Reporting is a big thing. A lot of ELDs, they'll have a few canned reports that these are the reports that you can get out of the system. There's others that have more robust reporting where, I need a report. They have spent the money to build into the reporting where you can customize your own reports or have a report built for you fairly easily. So just for your operation and how you want to use it. The programming that goes into an ELD I looked at a trip report from a name brand telematics system, and for those of you that are familiar with I-84 between Portland, Oregon and Boise, know that it goes along the Columbia River Gorge, and it's a twisty, windy road, steep canyons. And I looked at the trip, and it had pings. Even though I was all on the Oregon side, it had pings on the Oregon side, and then it would have a ping. The next ping would be on the Washington side, and the next ping would be on the Oregon side, and so forth down along through the gorge, because it wasn't accurately adjusting to where the truck was. And their algorithm to figure out distance was a straight line. They go, what is the distance between this point and that point in a straight line? And so the distance wasn't even correct. And that was on a major name brand system that, if you're using it for an ELD, that probably might be enough to get you by, because the FMCSA isn't really concerned about your distance. More so, and location, they're concerned about it within a mile or so, but it doesn't have to be accurate like it does for IFTA reporting. They want accuracy. So having your distance calculated with some miles on the Washington side and some miles on the Oregon side may float for the FMCSA, but it will not absolutely float with IFTA if you ever get audited. So how they program it and how they calculate the miles, and if they overlay that map, overlay those pings on a map, even what maps do they use? The maps that are out there differ depending on which map you use. And an important consideration you need to take into consideration, future proof. If you think about your phone, how many of you have a phone that you've had for 3 years or longer? A lot of us change our phones every year with the new features that come out. They can do newer and better things, and we want those features. And what I learned at this Geotab conference is what you buy your telematics system for today. Maybe it's only the ELD, but it isn't going to be how you use it tomorrow. And when you first bought your phone, you use it to make phone calls, your cell phone. But today you probably use your smartphone in many, many, many more ways than just phone calls. So, and it's going to be the same for this in-truck telematics thing. So there's a lot of buyer beware type of scenarios that you've really got to go through to make sure your ELD product is what you need. All right, and then of course the other bad thing, there is a cost to all this. Telematics there's a cost, and it's a new cost if you haven't had to have it before. There is a cost of paper logs, but you've always been doing that. So this next slide, it's not my data. I actually went on to Keep Truckin' website yesterday. They're on the list here, and they had this data, and I just kind of put it into my own little spreadsheet here. I did add the two bottom folks, E-Road and the Geotab. In both of those, are one. I added them because they're ones that I've vetted, and I knew what the information was to add to the spreadsheet. So, and you can see that most of the folks on here are folks that you know, Fleetmatics and Omnitrax and PeopleNet and Teletrack and Telelogis, Zonar. You've all heard of those people. If we go back to that slide with the certified FMCSA vendors on there, you won't see any of those names on there. Will they be on there? Absolutely yes, but they're not on there yet. And why aren't they on there yet? That's a common question. The most typical answer that I hear from these vendors is that the FMCSA is in the building process of what they're going to call their EROD software, the software that's going to audit this data. And these major players that have been in the business a long time didn't want to announce their ELD solution without knowing what the FMCSA's solution is going to be, so that they can make sure that their software integrates with it properly. So they've all been holding back. And however, the time is starting to run short, and as in just about every FMCSA project, it always takes them much longer to do it than they say. And so they have not fully developed their EROD system yet. So you're going to start seeing these major players start to hit that list, because they all have products in beta testing and ready for approval. Again, they've been waiting for the FMCSA. The FMCSA is not going to allow them to wait. And I even talked to, I think EROD, was it last week, and EROD said they're just waiting for the FMCSA to add them to the list. They've already gone through the certification process. So a lot of these names are not on the list today, but Geotab, I believe, is going to be March or April. They will be on there, and I'm sure Omnitrax and PeopleNet and such are also on there. So as far as costs go, you can see that there's a hardware cost. A lot of the leading ones are going to a lease program. You got to take a look at the contract. Again, how long do you want to keep that technology and sign yourself up for? You can see, PeopleNet, according to the data on Keep Truckin' website, is at $1,200 for the hardware and a $3,800 implementation fee. Setting it up, and maybe there's some integration involved in that $3,800. I'm not sure what it all entails, but you can see there are differences. And then there's the monthly fee for maintaining the back end, which is where all the data is going, and the cellular fees that are involved in getting the data to the back end. All of that it varies quite dramatically, as you can see. And first year cost, just from these major players based on this data, and again, some of that first year cost is a one-time cost, but you can see the monthly prices vary pretty dramatically. So anyway, the bad, there definitely are costs involved, and you need to weigh those costs, but you need to weigh them against the manufacturer. And again, I'll go back to, there's 3 pages full of manufacturers on there, and they're not all going to survive. And if you've bought a unit from somebody that doesn't survive, the FMCSA, if you're not supported and it's not backed up, you're going to have to rebuy. So you need to make sure that the person you buy from, the manufacturer that you buy from, is going to be a surviving player. And how do you know that? You've just got to do your homework. So, all right. So minimizing the bad. How do you approach it? And you really need to create a plan. You need to talk about, okay, how am I going to approach this technology? If I'm exempt from having to do it, maybe do I just want to postpone getting into technology? That might be what you decide. However, you've got to know that other competitors that will be using the technology may be putting themselves into a better cost position, that they can compete better than you. So you need to make that plan. Maybe the plan is, I just want to go lightly within this world and just get an ELD for now. I'll work on all of this other big data stuff later as I grow and as I learn this technology stuff. That could be your plan. You really need to decide, what we do in our operation. What can we do? What can technology do to help us? And what is our comfort level in this change? How do we want to approach it? And so basically, once you figure that out, that'll help you, figure out what do I need to, what technology is going to best fit my plan. So it really starts with talking about the technology. What changes is it going to require in my operation? How are we going to implement? How are we going to measure it? And then going out and making sure that the technology fits your plan. And then lastly, to minimize the bad, allow time for the transition. This is a big transition, and it takes time. I go back to some of the case studies that I've read, and even some of the large companies said, it took them 6 months or more to get through, the changes in the training and getting the bugs worked out and getting it on all levels of their operation to make sure it was being used properly. So there is a learning curve, and you need to allow time for that. If you're waiting till December 2017 and thinking it's just going to run smoothly, it's going to be, you're setting yourself up for some things that are worse than what they could be, as if you approach it with taking some time. So, all right, so that brings us back to the ugly, the good, the bad, and the ugly in our movie reference. So what is the ugly? And the ugly is getting into FMCSA hell, as I call it, is going to be much, much easier. I mentioned the software that the FMCSA is developing. That is going to literally be able to take a many thousand truck fleet and analyze their hours of service in a matter of minutes, where today it could take literally weeks to do that. So getting into trouble through ignorance or not managing your system is going to become much, much easier, at least in the way of hours of service. And so the ugly is that getting put out of service is going to be much, much easier. If you take the tact of, I'm just going to ignore it, I'm not even going to do it, or if you take the tact of, I'm going to relent, I'm just going to buy this, the cheapest ELD product I can get, I'm just going to throw it in the truck, but you don't manage it, that's basically not using the tool, and the chances of getting found out and having it dealt with by the FMCSA is going to become much greater. So the ugly is going to happen out there. We've got, I think one of our upcoming webinars, we've got Tony, who is an ex-DOT roadside inspector, is going to talk about how the enforcement officers are likely to approach ELDs, at least initially, and through their learning curve, and that's a whole nother topic to get into. But if the approach is I don't want to deal with it, or ignorance, it's going to be much, much easier to catch. So that kind of takes me through my presentation, and so maybe I'll get Luke back on here to help me with, he's been hopefully keeping track of any questions that you might have, and I'll try to answer them the best I can.
Thank you for this great presentation. We're in the Q&A session. So far during the presentation, there has been no questions been asked, so I will wait a little bit. We're getting some questions coming in now, it looks like. So this person said, we have one truck that is year 2000 and we'll be getting another used truck, not sure if it's vintage. We currently have one driver and we'll hire a second driver to utilize the other used truck, and they only haul their own products. Are we normally, and they normally drive in Washington and Oregon, does that sound like the ELD device? Are they going to be exempt from the ELD?
Well, again, it's 2000 or older, and it's based on the VIN number of the chassis, not the engine. So if it is truly 2000 or older, it will be exempt from an ELD. But you'll need to make sure that it's maybe it was it was a 2001 versus a 2000, and I mean there's going to be a big difference there. So you'll need to make sure through the VIN number that is really a 2000. But if it is 2000 or older, and not just something with an old motor in it, taking a newer chassis and putting an older motor, that won't cut it. It's going to be based on the year that's indicated on the VIN number of it. So it's got to be truly 2000 or older chassis.
And they currently drive in Washington and Oregon. I don't know if they currently have to do driver logs, but do you want to quickly touch on the air mile radius exemption?
So again, if it's over 26,000 pounds, the air mile radius exemption is 100 air miles, which is equivalent to about 115 road miles, I believe, somewhere in there. And you can easily go on to, I think, Google and say air mile radius, and I think there's some maps that will even, you can put your center in there and it'll draw a circle around it within 115 air miles, so you can get it exact. I would suggest doing that if that if it's anywhere close to being whether you're 100 miles or not, but so there's a way to check it. So 100 air mile radius, but the other part of that is the driver must start out and return to the same location, and the driver must not work more than a 12-hour day, has to be back within 12 hours, and 11 of those hours, no more than 11 of those hours driving. And this is the one that catches a lot of construction companies. In the heat of the construction season, they're a construction company. They're not a motor carrier, or at least they feel they aren't. But they do, if their vehicles are over 10,000 pounds, they are a commercial motor vehicle, and they feel, well, I start out and I end in the same spot, so I don't go more than 150 air miles in my small, medium-sized truck, but I'm never back within 12 hours. Well, if you're not back within 12 hours, you don't qualify for the exemption, and you need the ELD. And or you need to change your operation so that you leave your equipment on site and you drive your personal car back and forth between the job site. So there's a lot of folks in the gray area there, and again, the technology is going to make it tougher for these folks to stay under the radar.
Yeah, and they mentioned that they actually do paper logs right now, and I think that's usually the rule of thumb. If you're doing paper logs, you're probably going to need the ELD.
If you're required to do paper logs, you need to do the ELD because you don't fit the exemption. But if you fit the exemption, it's not that you don't have to do anything. You still need to keep time cards, and drivers still can't drive over or past 11 hours and such. The rules still apply. You just don't have to keep those log grids.
Great, and we got a second question, just wanting to quickly explain how the 2-year grandfather clause will work.
All right, so again, phase 1 we're into right now, and that's just the awareness stage leading up to the implementation of electronic logging. And so the implementation of electronic logging means either the automatic onboard recording device, the AOBDR or AOBRD, that is, if you look up 395.15, I believe, in the FMCSA book, you'll see that automatic onboard recording device rule and what must happen with that if you have an automatic onboard recorder, what it must do. So the FMCSA has had that specified for a number of years now. So if you qualify for that, you will be fine on December 2017. If you don't have an AOBRD, then you'll have to have an ELD. So the grandfather is if you're using an electronic recording device now as defined by 395.15, you don't need to worry about December 2017. You are grandfathered for another 2 years. Basically, the FMCSA is allowing you to you've made an investment into that equipment. They are going to allow you another 2 years to get that return on that investment before they make you change in 2019 to a fully compliant ELD. It's just the interim stage. So electronic logging is going to happen in 2017 or December 2017. But it's either going to be an ELD under the new rule, or it's going to be under the automatic recording device that is in the current rule book. So one of those two methods.
Great. And I'll quickly, are there any other questions from the audience? It looks like there isn't. So before we wrap up, I want to thank Dave again for taking his time out of his day to give us this presentation. Dave, thank you. If you guys in the audience want to learn more about ELDs, we've done the research for you. You can come check us out at glowstone.com/geotab. Again, these slides will be sent to you afterwards. And lastly, we have some upcoming webinars as well as our partner company, Clean Fleet. In 2 days, so Thursday, Clean Fleet's going to be doing a webinar on the DOT clearinghouse, drug and alcohol clearinghouse, and how it'll affect your company. You can see the link there to visit their website. And also the next one for Glowstone in March is ELD roadside enforcement, how to be prepared. So with that, I'd like to conclude this webinar. Have a great day.